All right, so we are in the last video of our notes. We're going to be talking about climate. So climate is the long-term temperature and moisture conditions for a particular area. So we're going to be talking a whole lot about temperature and moisture. So how much water is in the air, how much precipitation is occurring, and what are our temperatures? Is it hot or is it cold? So climate's going to be affected by a couple of different variables, or a couple different factors. And the first one that I want to talk about is latitude. So latitude is going to have a huge impact on climate. So as latitude increases, the climate generally gets colder. And we can see this in the United States, right? People go to Florida in the winter here, around here, because it's warmer in Florida during the winter here. And the reason for that is it's closer to the equator. It's receiving a whole lot more direct sun rays than we are, this far up north. So the closer you get to the equator, typically, the warmer your climate is going to be. The next thing I want to look at is your distance from a large body of water. So one of the Great Lakes, or particularly oceans, right? The closer you are, you will have cooler summers and warmer winters. So what we end up doing with water is it ends up regulating our climate. Remember, water takes a whole lot of energy to heat up, and it takes a really long time to cool down compared to the land. So what's going to happen is in places that are near a body of water are going to end up having cooler summers. It's not going to get quite as hot. But in the winter, the opposite's going to happen. It's going to stay a little bit warmer than it normally would because of that large body of water either warming the air in the winter or cooling it in the summertime. So continental climates are the opposite. The farther you are from a large body of water, the hotter your summers are going to be and the colder your winters are going to be. So they're going to result in a large range in annual temperatures. They're going to be totally different. Your winters are going to be very, very cold, and your summers are going to be very, very hot if you are really far from a large body of water. So let's take a look at this right here. So we've got our temperatures. Remember, our temperature is going to be our line here. So we're going to try and figure out whether this is a continental climate or more of a marine climate. Now, looking at it, we have a temperature range of 25 degrees Celsius all the way down to -5 degrees Celsius. So that is going to be a huge range in our temperature. So this is going to end up being a continental climate. And we look at when we look at these climate graphs, that's one of the first things that we're going to be looking for is how much does our temperature change throughout the year? Because it's going to tell us a lot about the climate of an area. So this is going to be a continental climate. How do we know? Larger range in the temperatures throughout the year. So let's take a look at this one. Once again, this is going to be a continental climate. We've got a huge range in temperatures throughout the year. Another way of telling is there's not a whole lot of precipitation happening in this area, right? When you're close to a large body of water, you're going to have a little bit more precipitation than you would otherwise. So how can we tell that this graph is from a place in the southern hemisphere? Well, we got to look at our line, our temperature line. And if our coldest temperatures are found in June, July, and August, we know that this place must be in the southern hemisphere. Remember, their seasons are flipped compared to ours. So when we're in our summer months, they are going to be in their winter months. So June, July, and August are going to be the coldest months for places like Australia, South Africa, Argentina, all these places that are in the southern hemisphere. The opposite is also true. When we take a look at our winter, they are going to be in summer. So the nicest months of the year, or the hottest months of the year in Australia, are going to be December, January, and February. All right, so another thing that's going to affect our climate is going to be the direction of our prevailing winds. So if the winds are coming from an ocean, right? If they're blowing over an ocean before they get to where you are going to have a more humid climate. If the opposite's true, if they're coming from the land and going out towards the ocean, then you are going to have a drier climate. What side of a mountain range you are on is also going to affect your climate. So if you are on what's called the windward side, or the side of a mountain range where wet air coming over an ocean or a large body of water is coming from, you are going to have a much wetter climate than on the other side, the leeward side. And I'll explain why that is. So as that water comes over the ocean, it's got a lot of moisture in it. Well, it hits the mountain range and it has to increase its altitude, right? It has to go up. It can't go through the mountains, right? So as it goes up, it begins to cool and it begins to precipitate. And all of that rain falls out of that air and precipitates out of that air on our windward side of our mountain. Now, as it goes over the top, it's going to now be dry air and it's going to start to descend. It's going to start moving down the mountain. And as it starts to descend, it's going to compress. And this is actually going to warm the air. So now we're going to have hot and dry air on our leeward side of our mountain. Now, this is where some of the driest deserts on Earth exist, on the leeward side of mountain ranges. Think of the Atacama Desert is on the leeward side of the Andes Mountains. There are places in that desert that have never received rain for as long as we've had weather stations there. And it's all because of this. It creates this kind of rain shadow behind our mountains. Elevation is also going to have an impact on our climate. The higher up you go in elevation, the colder it's going to be. This is because as that air is rising, it's going to be expanding, and that's going to cause the air to cool down. All right, where you are in relationship to our ocean currents is also going to have an impact on your climate. So if you are close to a warm ocean current, it's going to warm the land. If you are close to a cool ocean current, it's going to cool down the land. So this is on page 4 of your reference table. So if I look at this, I can see one here. I want to pick this one out right here. This is the Gulf Stream. It is a warm water ocean current that goes from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up here to the North Atlantic. And it has a huge impact on the climate of Western Europe and, the British Isles to be specific, or even Iceland. Because of this warm current that's moving up there, it's bringing warm air along with it. Now, if we look at the latitude of the British Isles and we look at this part of northern Canada right here, that is an almost Arctic portion of Canada. It is very cold. Their winters are very cold. Their summer is very short, and they don't have it doesn't get very hot there. On the flip side of this, because this portion is being warmed by this warm current, England and Ireland have fairly mild winters, right? It snows there, but it's not a super common thing. They don't get dumped down with snow, and it's not insanely cold throughout the entire winter. So these currents can have a giant impact on what the climate of an area is like. All right, where you are in regards to your low and high pressure belts is also going to have a huge impact on your climate. So right here at 0 degrees latitude, we have the equator, and right there is a low pressure belt. Now remember, when we talk about low pressure air, it's usually got a whole lot of moisture in it, and it's usually fairly warm. That makes sense for the equator, right? The equator usually has the highest temperatures of anywhere on Earth in the warmest climates. So we have a low pressure belt right there. At 30 degrees north latitude, we have a dry pressure belt because that air is convecting and it has to come back down somewhere. So it starts to sink at about 30 degrees north latitude. And it's dry sinking air. So these are places where you don't have a lot of clouds, you don't have a lot of rain. This is where some of the largest deserts on Earth exist at both 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south latitude. Right here, we've got another wet area that's going to be at 60 degrees north, and then finally at our polar regions at both at 90, we're going to have dry descending air. And that's why the Antarctica is one of the largest deserts on Earth. It doesn't precipitate very often down there. It doesn't snow very often down there because there's dry descending air. All right, that does it for our 6 climate factors, and that does it for this unit. So on to the next unit.